Alright, so I'm just going to teach y'all something really quick today. Something that I think is useful, and I used Libgdx for quite a little bit before learning about this actually and making use of it. But anyways, I think it is useful and that y'all probably like it. So all I've done here is I have your standard Libgdx project that you get when you use the project generator jar here. Anybody who's watching this video, I assume you've at least set up a libgdx project before. I use IntelliJ here. All you have to do is get this starter jar, click on the jar on your desktop or wherever you save it. It'll bring this up. I've used these settings. This is all the standard settings basically. So, I've done essentially, these are checked by standard, but I just like to for these tutorials, I just go to just desktop. We don't want to have to deal with any of this other stuff. I uncheck box 2D, all that, just hit generate. It'll give you a project in the folder that you designate here. You can name the, project package, starting package, which is this up here, etc., however you want. But I just left everything default for simplicity today. Everything's going to be default. We're not even going to make any extra fancy classes. We're going to work right in the sort of starter classes they give you. And whenever you make a libgdx project, by the way, importing the libgdx project into IntelliJ is super easy. You just right click on it and literally open as a IntelliJ project. If you want to do it in Eclipse, it's not much harder. You can just import it from inside Eclipse. You just go over here and just import project. You can probably do that in IntelliJ too. Now, one thing to note when you first get started on a project, you're not going to have your run configuration set up. So if you're in IntelliJ, you'll look up here and it will not say desktop launcher. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and attempt to run the desktop launcher. Then you're going to get an error down here, and it's going to tell you something about could not find an image or something like that. So what you want to do is go over here to the edit configurations, and you want to make your working directory, your assets folder. This thing right here, you want to set that to be your assets folder. I don't know why it's not set there by default. It's kind of dumb, but anyways, once you do that, you will be able to run the default libgdx project, which is this right here. That's a little detour, but what I really wanted to talk about today is just like how to use sprite sheets. So if you see here, I have a sprite sheet that has multiple different tiles and little characters and stuff in it. Now, the reason why this is good to do, and we're going to use texture regions to pull these out. The reason why this is good to do is because if I load this one large texture, it's a lot more efficient on the GPU of the computer, but also just memory in general and stuff, loading one large texture broken up into a lot of evenly sized parts than it is to load each one of these parts as separate textures. So you see right now the bad logic image is its own texture. If I were to load every single image from this into memory as its own texture, that's a lot more expensive than just loading this sprite sheet into memory and then taking parts out of it, which is what we're going to do today. So we're going to change that to sprite sheet.png. In the first place, textures are really easy to work with in libgdx. Whenever you start a project, you get a batch, which draws to the screen for you. As far as I know, you only ever want one batch in your entire project. I think there might be rare scenarios where you might be able to do some funky stuff with more than one batch. But basically, the batch, you don't really have to know about its inner workings. You could check it out if you want, but the reality of it is you're going to use batch.begin in your render method, and you're going to use batch.end. And in between those, you're going to draw to the screen using the batches draw method. And the draw method is overloaded to take textures, texture regions, all kinds of stuff. So it's really useful. And it also takes different parameters. Like this is the position of the image, which right now is just at 0, 0. As you can see, these pictures are really small, by the way. These are 32 by 17, so they're very, very small, which is why they can fit all on the screen at one time. But it's just drawing it at 0, 0. and they're in the middle of the screen because obviously it's a big image with lots of blanks. So 0, 0 is actually down here. In any case, I'm just trying to go as simple as possible today, so we're not even going to make a camera or anything. Okay, we're going to take this texture, this image that we have, this sprite sheet per se, and we're going to split it up a little bit. So how are we going to do that? Well, Libgdx has these things called texture regions. And basically, you can use this to efficiently get out part of your texture without having to load an entirely new texture into memory, right? This is going to take a piece out of the texture that's already loaded in memory. So there's like no, there's nothing new here, right? If you were to make another texture, that's a whole nother new texture being loaded into memory. By the way, if you're ever confused about like what a texture is, basically like a sprite, an image that you're going to draw. I wouldn't get too caught up in the inner workings of this. It's basically a class that wraps some like graphics library functionality that you wouldn't want to deal with, right? The great thing about using libgdx is that you don't have to deal with OpenGL, the graphics library stuff. All you have to worry about is, okay, I have an image. It has some convenience classes inside of it, and I can draw the image, right? That's really what you want. So now one useful thing to do is you could have a sort of texture region like this, which, we'll just do that first. But you could also do like an array of texture regions or a list of them or something. And then, you could make a static method in another class or just some kind of method that, and then you could say like, in a particular scene or something like that, you'd say, texture regions array, I don't know what you would call it, and then you could say whatever, method, whatever class dot get, regions for something, right? That's the way I would set it up if I was making a game, right? Then you could get all of your regions for that one sort of scene that you're making. Anyways, once you have a texture region here, so, okay, what do you do with this? Because obviously when you make the texture region, it's not going to know what you want, right? So you're going to put your image in there, first of all. So now it knows that's what it's going to be pulling its own image out of. And then you're going to define where to start. So in this case, we'll start very simple. We're going to pull out the grass tile here. Now, if you'll notice, the grass tile is in the top left corner, which means that it starts at 0, 0. And then we're going to tell the region start at 0, 0. So 0, 0. And that's not going to actually be the width and height, by the way. It's just that's once we add 2 more parameters, that'll become the x and y. So start at 0, 0, and then go 32 across and 17 down. Because this image starts at 0, 0 and is 32 pixels wide and 17 across. Now you have a region that sort of is just the grass tile. You've successfully pulled the grass tile out, right? If we go ahead and look, see now it draws the grass tile at 0, 0 because the region has pulled that grass tile out of the texture. If you wanted the next tile over, like, okay, you're now at 0 on the Y still, but you're at 32 on the X, right? So go ahead and pull the next tile out. And this is why I said it's kind of useful to make an array of these regions, because you could probably do this in a loop or something and then end up with a texture region array that has all the separated texture parts, which, like I said, once again, is super efficient compared to making, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many separate textures, which are going to be loaded and deloaded from the GPU and all that. These texture regions are just holding stuff that's already loaded. So boom, there, now you have the dirt tile instead. And I'm sorry this is so small. These assets were meant to be zoomed in on, but for the simplicity of this video, I'm not going to go through making a camera and all that. You can see the thing down there in the corner. If I expand it out a little bit, whoops. If I expand it out a little bit, you can see the dirt. That's interesting how it does that when you expand it. But anyways, you can see the dirt tile down here that we've pulled out. So in any case, I know that this is not very complex, but I find that when people first start using libgdx, they really abuse texture, and they don't think about doing the sprite sheet thing. Now, there is a hang up with this. It gets a little bit weird if you want to use things that are not all the same size. So then you might want to consider doing some other stuff like a texture atlas, which maybe I can make a video about that one day. I don't want to do it now because I feel like the video would get too long probably since I'm not prepared for it. But you could still do it if the things were not evenly sized. It would just be a little bit more annoying, right? Like if you had a 32 by 17 here, but then you had a 42 by 18 here, things would get a little bit annoying, but you could still do it. In any case, yeah, this is something, like I said, that I think a lot of people don't think about when they first start using libgdx. And I know even when I first started, I used textures for like everything until I looked a little bit deeper into it, and I was like, oh, this just seems like a smarter idea. Also, it keeps your asset folder clean, right? Because you have this in your asset folder instead of 20 different images in this. Even if you made separate folders for them, it still would just be your asset folder in a bigger game would get to be a complete mess. So this is worse. This is worth considering, I think. Yeah, and I think this was simple enough. Is there anything else worth mentioning here? You can maybe... by the way, I didn't change anything in this part of the project. Cool. No, I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about. And you can see an example here. I'll pull my Sublime text over here. You can see an example here of where I made a static method that returns a texture region array. Sorry, this might not be the biggest. But I hope you can still see it. You can see an example here where I made a static method that can be called from anywhere. Basically, I just made my texture static, and I said that's my sprite sheet for the game. It'll always be loaded into memory, right? Because it's my sprite sheet for the entire game. So it always should be loaded into memory, and it gets loaded once, and then from there you make different static methods to access whatever you need. For this time, it was like, get it for the world map, and then I had this for this besieged area. I know that means nothing, but it was for a game I was making. And you could have a bunch of static methods that pull from your one sprite sheet to get these sort of regions that you need. In this case, I needed 10 regions, and I even had some constants here that define tile width and tile height. And all I did was add to them to access different parts of the region and different starting areas. So cool. Anyways, just a little quick little video, I hope, about something that it took me a long time to realize. Also, something about memory management. Don't forget that anything that can be disposed should be disposed. I know early on, when I was working with libgdx early on, I kind of ignored this. I didn't use dispose a lot, but you definitely want to use that because in libgdx, you do have a little bit of memory management. If you don't dispose of things, as you switch between scenes in your game, you'll have some memory leaks. So once again, if anything can be disposed, you want to dispose of it once it goes out, once it's no longer used, right? Once this game class is no longer used, technically the game's shut off because this is like the top level class, right? But in cases where you had like an image in a class that was, you know, for a scene and you're off that scene now, maybe you went from one level to another, you'd want to dispose the assets of the previous level. All right, well, that's it for me today. Don't listen to me just ramble on forever. Like always, if you have a question, ask me in the comments, or if there's something more on this you want to see, just let me know.